Hello and welcome to Topic 10, Social Media Research and Analytics. This is, I'm going to say, probably my favorite topic. I do majority of my academic research in analytics and social listening, and I see it as a fundamental way to actually learn about who my clients are, customers are, broader stakeholders are, and using that understanding sentiment and their patterns and the behaviors to better inform strategy, but also to respond to crises. So what are the learning outcomes, objectives for topic 10? So how do companies utilize social data and research to inform marketing decisions? What is the research process for collecting, processing, and analyzing residual social media data in a social and used in social listening and social monitoring? What are the common errors and biases, and how do brands develop social intelligence systems? So, why is social listening such a profound component to social media marketing? Really, it's because one, there's so much data. Like everything you do online is tracked, right? Every button you click, if you go from a website to a social site back to where all those patterns are clicked, everything you purchase is noted. How long you even scroll on a screen's noted. Like literally, there's every minute piece of data that you can think of is collected in a social setting. So it becomes a really powerful way to understand your customers and then use that information to better strategize and target them. But we've got a couple of different types of information. Essentially, we've got secondary research, which is data that's already been collected that you use. You've got primary research where you collect your own data, and you've got social media research, which is what we're focusing on here, is essentially the application of scientific marketing research principles to collect and analyze, collect an analysis of social media data such that valid and reliable results are produced. So it helps us with things like social monitoring. So that's kind of the process of tracking mentions and specific words and phrases in social sites. So we just cruise down here. We've essentially got two types. We've got the proactive component. So this is where we use information to push strategy forward, simply. And then you got reactive. So that's when we are essentially responding to a problem or an opportunity right then and there. So it might be a consumer complaint. It might be a lot of things, but essentially it's reactive. So it can help with social customer care. So brand mentions can be used to identify service satisfaction issues for reactive. Many people write complaints online and they expect a response. So that's also important. For market research, so social media research can inform many decisions facing the marketing strategist, as I said, in a proactive setting. I can't help but tell you, over the last 4 years in particular, the better I've got at doing social monitoring and social listening, none of my ideas are original anymore. They're essentially born out of the community. So it's what we call citizen sourcing. So social listeners call it citizen sourcing. So I listen so much to the citizens in the community that they often have the solutions, or often can identify the path forward without actually requiring managers that put too much effort into it beyond coordinating it and making sure it's balanced. So little things like tracking brand mentions of key competitors and comparing those to the brand kind of give us a really good position of where we sit within the position in the marketplace. So you can do that really, really easily. Sorry. We've got brand mentions, we can gather customer insights, we can provide customer service, we can gather ideas for future campaigns. These are all really, really powerful avenues for social listening. We can gather competitive intelligence. One of the projects I've worked on recently is actually looking at in that mental health space, looking at what competitors are doing and noting how people are reacting to their strategies. So it's not about just allowing us to identify what we're going to do but I can actually start to predict what our competitors will do strategically, and it suddenly becomes like a little game of chess. And then we can identify ideas for new products and identify risks that could lead to public relations crises. So there are no big problems, right? All there are is lots of little problems that led up to that big problem. And social media listening allows you to identify those little problems. Whether you act on them or not is a completely different question. But it allows you to identify all those little problems really early on. And if your systems are sophisticated enough, you can actually get onto them really, really quickly. The other thing it does, it allows you, which kind of cuts across all this stuff, is actually assess how your campaigns are going, right? So it can provide really good feedback on how a campaign or other brand communications was received by others. So you can do a broad spectrum social listening strategy where you look at it continually, and then you can break it up into different campaigns that are popping up. So it's quite versatile. So social customer care. So 67% of social media users have used the company's social media channel to reach customer support. Of those, 84 expected a response within 24 hours. So if your systems aren't in place, you're going to really, really struggle, right? What else? Customers spend 20 to 40% more with companies that use social media to service customer care requests, right? So just think about that. So one of your greatest strengths would be the listening and response motion, because it can actually increase the amount of time they spend with you. It's fundamental. 71% of customers who experience a quick and effective brand response to their support requests on social media are likely to recommend the brand. 71%. So again, this engagement through social listening and social customer care is phenomenal. But sadly, 1 in 10 customer care requests made on social media don't get any response. Oh, sorry, only 1 in 10 get a response. That means 9 out of 10 customers are left completely unsatisfied. Now that's actually really, really scary. All right, so one thing that we've implemented, and this all comes back down to governance and policy and how that is essentially organized. So the customer organization and the team organization around social media actually has a massive impact on how social care is actually implemented. If it's very hierarchical, all right, and it takes a long time for people to identify an issue and then feed that back up the chain to get an agreed upon response and come back down the chain, people are already over it. You know, they're already writing a bad review. So you need to really think real carefully about how you mobilize your team to respond. Alright, so the Sprout Social Index report quarterly on data scraped from billions of messages representing hundreds of thousands of Facebook, Twitter posts. So look at this. Let's see if we can find a star amongst the group. So hospitality and tourism and retail look like they're going okay. And media and entertainment aren't doing so great, which is not surprising, actually. But look at marketing and advertising. Wow, look at our response. Post per replies. Woo. It's very impressive. But the utility sector, real estate sector, you know, often that are really driven hard by sales, are higher ranked than, say, automotive and marketing and advertising. So real estate, you know, a lot of them work on commissions, so, you know, there's an additional motivation, and each agent usually has a level of autonomy to discuss things. So as I was saying previously about organizational structure and team structure, it actually has a massive impact on, as you can see here, the metrics when it comes to customer indexes, like around customer satisfaction and responses in social media. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we can do it. So social media listening and the research process. So software or service systematically searches and scrapes data from social media channels. Data includes qualitative, so this is actual what people say or type, so this is natural language, and quantitative, so these are source, volume, unit characteristics, likes, shares, that sort of stuff. Determined approach, Determining approach, research design, and setting research protocols ensures data collection are appropriate for research users, and also you need to be aware that they need to be ethical. And common application includes sentiment analysis and content analysis. So sentiment analysis essentially, well, I'll show you in the next slide. Sentiment analysis. So you essentially fetch, crawl, scrape, cleanse, right? So you go out, you collect a whole bunch of natural language data. So just say review comments. You go through them all to make sure that all the review comments directly relate to your brand, because you don't want to be, coding sentiment that's not related to your brand. And then you cleanse it. So essentially you remove all non-essential comments and identify the ones that you need to do. Then you extract the relative data points. So you pull out the phrases and the comments that are most relevant to your brand, and then you extract sentiment using sentiment indicators. Now they typically are keywords and key phrases, and then you aggregate the data in a summary. So essentially what you do, you say X number of positive, X number of neutral, X number of negative. What you're hoping for, depending on what you're looking at, is probably more positive than negative. But that little simple process ends up giving you a figure that you can identify as, hey, we got a plus. Say if you're looking at, depending on which method you use, you've got a ton of different methods, and in the workshops we'll actually discuss them in a little bit more detail. But you've got methods where it's like -1 to 1, so you might get a 0.9, so that's very high, or you might get a negative 0.9, which is not that great, right? So, and then we can apply what's called content analysis. Is used to identify the presence of concepts and themes within the qualitative data set. So what I actually like to do when I do this is actually do the content analysis first. So identify the core themes. So whether they're represented in images or words or video, doesn't matter. So identify the core themes, like say service quality, value for money, blah, blah, blah. And then run the sentiment analysis with the data grouped under those themes. That way I can see what my score is for service quality. So I might get a 1 for service quality, all the comments are really positive. Then I look at value for money, and it might be -1, because I'm selling something that should be $10 for $200 and people aren't happy with it. It might be availability, it might be postage speed, whatever it is. You can start to then get a real nice snapshot of what people are commenting on, and also how they're feeling in relation to that. So as we've got here, coding categories for content analysis. Analysis assigns codes based to classify data. So these are themes, comments, as I just said. So like you've got response, relationship codes, events codes, activity codes. It's important to kind of break them down like that, because you can actually start to make sense out of them, right? Because if you put everything together and you just get a mean score overall, it doesn't really provide you with any particular direction you should move strategically. It essentially just becomes a score that managers use to just say how good or bad their team's going. Alright, so sampling concepts, very easy. We've got an entire population. You develop your framework, then you select your sample. So essentially some people do have the capacity to actually get all the comments in relation to their brand, right? They've written amazingly detailed APIs across all the different platforms, and they can collect all the data, like millions and millions of posts. But typically that's beyond the reach of a SME, like small and medium enterprise, and you probably want to go for a sample of that. So is it the first 100 comments? Is it in the last 5 posts, or whatever it is? You need to make a decision on that, just to help you scale it down so it's doable. But we have to be warned. Potential research errors. So failure to cover population elements due to gaps between the sample frame and the population of interest. In social media, private citizens settings limit access. Now, if people only share with their friends or only share with themselves and you can't see what they're saying, you're potentially missing out on data. Sampling error occurs when sample selection results in a sample that fails to accurately represent the sampling frame, so it doesn't represent the entire population. In social media, challenges due to echo and participation effect. So is it the same person? And I've had this on the last project we worked with, we collected nearly 20,000 comments. And once I broke it down by user, we had one person, I think, make the same comment nearly 130 times. Right, so that's going to completely skew your results. But what that also potentially does is how does that infect the environment as well? So that this notion of echo is where the same group of people talk to each other and essentially validate their position, and that has a massive impact. So if you get in within a particular click group, you're not really getting a representative understanding of all the different voices and all the different positions out there. And we got non-response bias, so the potential for units not included in the sample to be significantly different from those who are, as I just mentioned. So if you're not getting a nice slice across the board, you could be missing out on a particular point of view or a particular voice that's really, really important, that would give you assistance in developing future strategy, or the more reactive component in responding to problems as they pop up. Now, when I mentioned ethics earlier, it wasn't just a passing comment. It actually needs a little bit of attention. And the example here, the reflective slide here, is really important, because traditionally when I started doing research, it was mainly interviews, focus groups, and surveys, right? So you used to have to go, you used to get approval, you had to make sure that you got consent of people. They could opt out at any time. If they didn't want their details recorded, they could be made anonymous. And there was a lot of checks and protocols in place to ensure the safety, security, and essentially the privacy of people. Now, in a social setting, we've had, not only can people's data get hacked, but we've also seen people like Facebook with Cambridge Analytica. We've got OkCupid. We've got that Madison one with the dating site, where a lot of people's data essentially got scraped and were then published non-anonymized online. And even academics have done this, where they'll actually identify the person who's posted the comment online. Now, this is completely unethical, because people do have a right to privacy, and they should be made aware if their data is being used for commercial purposes. Because essentially, if the brand is making money through improved strategy based on their data, they should be made aware of it. But you can't just use people data for nothing. Hence why a lot of sites tell you, just be aware that we collect data. Most people don't care, right? But there are some that do. We need to give people those opportunity to actually opt out of a situation. In social media, that can be, through social media research, that can actually be quite difficult sometimes. So, a model for social intelligence in the organization. So distribution of intelligence, data and analytics, data management, and then social media and data capture. Let's go into this a little bit deeper. So social intelligence is capturing, managing, and analyzing data, social data, to identify and apply insights to business goals. And essentially, there's different roles in that. You've got people who capture the data, you've got people who do the analytics and essentially then manage the data. But I won't go too much into it, because really it's not going to play a big part in this subject. I just really wanted you to be aware that there are different areas of the organization and different parts and roles involved in actually achieving this. So, social studios provide enterprise social listening services. So most social media management tools actually have inbuilt sentiment analysis in them. What they don't do well is actually have inbuilt content analysis in them. So they often give you an average score, or a mean score, or a tabulated score of how people are talking about your brand, but not what they're talking about. So they're still not 100% sophisticated by any means, right? But they are helpful. So it's important to just kind of get your head around exactly the capabilities and limitations of each one of these software. And then you got social media and ethnography. So Cosinets in the early 2000s developed essentially a social media plus ethnographic approach that he called netnography or netnography. So it actually has about 15 steps, but we don't really want to go through all 15 steps. So we'll just go through the main one. So it helps you identify online communities. That it's paramount, as we were talking about before, in sampling and understanding where your community is. For a whole lot of reasons, that's beneficial. It's important to identify where your communities are, and then select the ones with high traffic and high levels of activity, because if they're not active, it's not really going to be helpful to you. Then you need to learn about the community, its culture, as I said, all those unwritten rules of engagement. These are often also norms in there that are not always obvious, so you need to spend some time. Then you need to select the appropriate material for an analysis, whether it's text, image, text, video, whatever it is. And then you need to classify that material. And it's always important. Now, I always encourage my students, whether at undergrad level, postgrad level, PhDs, to always keep a journal reflection about the data collected. So how did you do it? What was missing? What was there? What type of barriers did you have? It's really important to make sure you continually reflect back, because through reflection you can continually improve. And then use member checks to assess accuracy of interpretation. So one thing I encourage, and it's part of the it's a field of research called participant reflexivity. It's actually where you get once you do the analysis that you think's right, and I've done this multiple times, is that where you go back to that community and say, hey, have I interpreted what you've said online correctly? Because it's, as we know, emails, text messages can all have dual meanings, what we call polysemy, and we need to make sure that we are interpreting things in accordance with the way it was intended, not the way we hope, right? It's the way it was intended that's really important. So fundamentally, what we need to go do is go back and check accuracy. It's really, really fundamental. All right, so some of the things that matter can be measured. Reach, the number of people exposed to a particular message, the frequency, which is really important. Site stickiness, so essentially a thing that Google dubbed as bounce rates, like how long people stay up. Click-through, so do people that click onto the ad end up going to purchase or actually clicking on the ad, or so understanding those things. And then sales conversion, so how many people that clicked. I'll just use a banner ad as an example. Not my preferred one, but if someone clicks a banner ad, how many clicks on that banner ad in relation to how many sales? So if you've got a 1 to 1,000 conversion, so 1 sale per 1,000 clicks, you know how effective you've been. If that ratio is 3 clicks per sale, you're doing phenomenally well, right? So it just helps you assess. And if you notice that an ad in Facebook is doing a lot better than, say, an ad on another platform, then you can start to prioritize where you put your money. So all these metrics essentially help you identify what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, as far as exposure goes, as far as action goes. So I don't tell you really the quality of the communication itself, like the composition or anything like that, but it starts to identify what sources are working and what not. And the ones that aren't, then you can follow up that with qualitative research, where you go ask people what's going wrong or what's going right with this particular type of communication. So numbers, 4,231 is a measurement. Without context, it's just a number. So when compared with a personal best, company's expectation, or your competitor's effort, that number becomes a metric. So essentially, it's numbers in context. It is now indicative of value, important, or a change in results. So, marketers use social media metrics to assess site traffic, click-throughs, sales, social influences, buzz, viral spread, brand sentiment, all these things. And they're all really, really important. Obviously, views and impression probably the most popular, because one, we can see reach, we can actually go that and that. Site traffic is fundamental. We want to know how many people are coming onto the site, and so on and so on. So, strategic options for social media measurement. Every manager's goal should be to move away from the fuzzy measurement and towards the quantifiable metric. So what's the fuzzy measurement? Essentially, it's a dead end, right? So we want to move towards things that we can measure and adjust. We can incorporate into potential success and start to identify what is working and what is not. Right, that's fundamentally what it's all about. So once we start mapping KPIs to the marketing funnel and customer journey, we can actually start to identify what type of things we're looking at. So obviously for awareness, you got reach, word of mouth, impressions, all the way down to advocacy. So we can start to look at user-generated content as reviews. We can look at ratings, positive word of mouth, and the social communities themselves. So I'm not going to go through all these individually. You can see them there and read about them later. But essentially, at each stage of the marketing funnel, there are metrics that we can identify and to use both content, sentiment analysis, and metrics, and really understand what is going on. All right, this is really important. And we can also start to map the engagement food chain if you want. So right from the beginning that they saw it, can we see who saved it for now or for later, who's rated it, repeated it, all the way up to recommended it. So it allows us to, again, break the metrics up into quadrants to see perhaps what point triggered something really, really good to happen, or where the whole system broke down. And this is probably my favorite slide. We're going to use this for your final assessment task. The dimensions of engagement. So we have engagement dimensions: involvement, interaction, intimacy, influence. Now, I like the involvement direction. It gives you a beautiful overview. It provides context, really. Yeah, the presence of a person to each social touch point. So everywhere you are, you can find out how many people have come and visited you, the content views, and just kind of break the page down and break each post down nice and simply. Then you got interaction. So then we can start to look at likes, shares, completion rates. Are they watching the entire video? Average time spent per interaction. That's a really good one. Comments and downloads. The last project that I looked on, we actually ran the analytics and identified the metrics for downloads, and we noticed that there was one particular resource that was tracking better than everything. So not only did we push that resource so it was easier to find, but we also made it one of our social media posts and created a series of social media posts out of it because we knew the importance of it. We wouldn't have known that if we weren't tracking the metrics, right? Influence, I'll get back to intimacy in a second. Influence, so the quantity, frequency, scores of reviews, ratings, right? These are really important, also linked to later topics as well. We can start to see the impressions that our network is having, our referrals. The intimacy, this is where we have the sentiment component, the compliments posted, user-generated content, people's brand attitudes, their emotions, how they think and feel about the brand, right? So these are really important to track all the time. This is not something that you want to wait till the end of a campaign to do. You should be tracking it along the way. Essentially, you should be tracking all these along the way. That way, unlike traditional campaigns where you wait till the end of the campaign to maybe tweak it, with social media you can tweak on the go. You're always in beta mode, remember? So these really help you identify what's going well and where you can improve. So understanding measurement and metrics. Measurements within a defined context are metrics. So measurements require context to provide useful feedback. No context, no understanding. The rule in semiotics is if it can't be framed, it can't be understood. Metrics that are tied to objectives are key performance indicators, right? So if we scoot back up to here, all these points are key performance indicators. So we can put a number and say to our team, this is what we hope to achieve with each one of these. Objectives must be well defined before we can identify key performance indicators. So it all goes back to the strategic component that we discussed in topic, I want to say 3 or 4. One of those where we actually looked at the strategy and we, developing your SMART objectives. So your SMART objectives directly link to your KPIs. The data approach. So we need to define the results, we need to assess them, we need to track them, and then we need to adjust the program based on the results to optimize future outcomes. Exactly what I've already said. Go in there, clearly context defined, we assess what's going on, we track them continually, and then we adjust where we need to. So, step 1 in the data process. Motivated some behaviors from the target audience, influencing brand knowledge, and accomplishing the first 2 objectives with fewer resources that might be required with other methods. So another way that we could present it is the smart objectives and metrics. Is like we got the objectives on one side. This might be a very good framework that you can use for your assessment task when you do your third assessment task, where you've got the objective on one side, the sample, the SMART specification, and the metrics that you'll be looking at on the other side. So just keep in mind 11.3 when it comes to developing assessment task 3. And then you got other common social media metrics. They're all listed there, and underneath each one of their categories. So that's nice and handy. Again, think about them for assessment task 3. That's all I'm saying. So, elements of the social media marketing metric matrix. So activity, interaction, and return matrix. So outcomes achieved from social media activities and engagement. We've kind of already covered all these, but it's important for your assessment task 4 that this is kind of what I'm going to be for assessment task 4. This is kind of what I'm going to be looking for. So it's really important that you fit them in assessment task 3 so you can measure them in assessment task 4. Step 2 in the data approach is to assess the value generated from social media marketing activities, interactions, and returns. So I've related an assessment to social media return on investment pyramid. So some alternate assessments that we can do is A/B testing, tactical efficiencies, opportunity costs, assessing service quality, message and crisis control, for example. So an A/B test, an example on call to action in Facebook. So as we can see here, once we include listening, we can start to identify exactly what's going on and how that can be potentially used to improve our situation. Step 3 in the data approach. This is actually kind of important. This is where we start to identify and track mechanisms. We establish a baseline comparison so we know essentially where to begin. We create activity timelines so we start to know when and what we're going to be looking for. What we're going to be looking for and when. Develop transaction data, and then we start to measure transaction precursors, and essentially overlay timelines and look for patterns. So it's kind of important that we kind of follow this process, because at the end of the day we want to be able to identify what is working and what isn't. So tracking approaches. So we've got forward tracking. So this is where developed prior to launching the activity or the campaign. Coincident tracking begins during the activity of the campaign. Then we got reverse tracking. So we conduct after an activity or campaign has been concluded. So it helps us to look forward. Potentially it can help us understand where we are right now, and then we can see how we've done before. So we can work on 3 levels of time. So data sources for tracking, we can our own sites, like using Google Analytics. I'm sure everyone's seen that. Everyone's experienced Google Analytics by now. We've got social networking profile activities, so Facebook Insights. We've got Twitter dashboards and all that. Social listening data analytics platforms like Brandwatch, and a lot of the social media management software, as I've already said, has got it. And then we've got niche analytic solutions and API tools. So these are essentially third-party apps that we can plug into social networking sites and social media sites more generally and extract data. It's harder and harder and harder to get access to the niche and API tools because of ethical and privacy issues that are currently in the industry, and I can't see it really improving anytime soon. So here's typically what a dashboard looks like. This is some social media management software. We can see how the impressions and likes and engagements and all that sort of happening across multiple pages, and all you do is click on the different page and it pops up and gives you all the insights. Again, doesn't tell you why, only tells you what is going on. So it identifies areas where you should be focusing more of your effort. Which brings us to adjust, step 4 in the data approach. So there is little value in measuring without a process for applying what you've learnt to future activities. So the simple ways you can start measuring is doing like content consumption. Who is interacting with and consuming the brands generated or consumer generated content? Is it who you want to consume your content? So you can start doing that. You can do content augmentation. So who is adding to or changing your content by continuing the conversation with response posts? In what ways is the content augmented? Is it consistent with what you want to do with the campaign? You can identify content sharing. At what rate are those exposed to the brand message sharing your content? Does this rate of sharing suggest campaign momentum, especially if you're after a viral campaign? Content loyalty, how many customers have subscribed or brand content with RSS feeds? Content conversations, who is discussing the brand, who is linking to their brand website? What is the comments to post ratio? And then you got content engagement. Is the number of friends to the brand's profile growing? Are people contributing content like comments or photos? These are all really important. So these will help us identify then what we can do in regards to revising, realigning, and base future decisions on this type of analysis. So it's really fundamental. Ultimately, from what I want you to get from this topic is you need to integrate the evaluation stage, as we demonstrated earlier. You need to integrate the evaluation stage at the objective stage, right? So we don't do evaluation last, hence why this is called topic 10, but it's being presented in week 4, right? I think it's in week 4. In week 4 is because it needs to be integrated at the start. It's done at the start, during, and at the end, right? So it's not a one-step process at the end. You need to start planning for it now. All right. Well, I hope this has been slightly enlightening in regards to metrics and analytics and how we can combine qualitative and quantitative approaches to better understand consumers and their interaction with us as the brand.